So I also want to acknowledge that we're on Noongar land and pay my respects to Noongars and to all Aboriginal people, especially because this project really is based in so many different people's countries and represents so many different languages. I mean, we all know there are lots of languages in Australia, and this is the traditional sort of Tyndale view of that for all its problems, and then there's the Horton map for all its problems. But nevertheless, it does give you that visual idea of how many languages and really how little we know, we being all of us, I think, but particularly the settlers. We did a very efficient job of wiping out so many languages. So the records that survive are so important because of that, because for many languages, obviously some are still spoken strongly, but for many languages all that remains are historical records. So this project aims to create a textual version of Daisy Bates's vocabulary collection. This is one part of the Daisy Bates papers. It's only a 13th of the papers that we're looking at today. But I want to do it in a way that respects the interests of current speakers, and like I said, because there are so many languages involved, it's very difficult to do any kind of consultative process with all of the descendants of all of the speakers, because there are lots. But nevertheless, this is part of why I'm doing these talks all over the place, try and show it to people and see what they think of it. It's also going to be made clear that these are historical sources on the languages and they're not authoritative versions of the language. And that's the problem when you put something on the web, people can think this is the way language should be, it's from 100 years ago, it's got to be the true language. So I want to try and make that clear all the time, that this is just one particular version of it. And I'm doing this using some technologies that are sort of are commonly used in other disciplines, a lot of this stuff. So the Text Encoding Initiative, it's an XML encoding, which I'll talk about a little bit today, but I'm happy to answer more questions about it. But then using RDF and SPARQL stores and all the sort of new web technologies that allow this material to have a life beyond just a presentation of images and text. But the images and text are important, and as Kim said, it's sort of making available historical sources. I think you have to make the image of the manuscript available together with an interpretation, because interpretations need a warrant, if you like. The warrant is the historical source. So putting them together means that people can check on what you've put into your typed version, but also, as we'll see in the Bates stuff, there's handwritten material that doesn't make it into the typed version. So it's worth having both of them up so that people can then say, but we need to add that to the typed version as well. We can provide a geographic visualisation of the vocabs, as we'll see, because each of the vocabs is named as coming from a particular place, and we want to be able to search over all of this material as well. And then there are some other things we'll do later on. So a fuzzy search, because this is filled out by lots of different people, the spelling systems that are used vary considerably. We want to have a way of being able to find as many hits as possible with different spellings, so fuzzy search will be that. We'll have an API to link to parts of the collection, and ultimately you can imagine, because of all these named individuals, places, it could tie into a much bigger project of, for instance, a biography of all Aboriginal people in Western Australia or something like that, link into the Bates collection as well. And I'll talk about the rest of it a bit later. So, I think we all most likely know Daisy Bates in West Australia. She's much better known, but also in the rest of Australia she's still very well known. Quite a forbidding sort of character, and also very controversial. We know she was a liar. We know, that she had fantasies about her own status, but she did record a huge amount of material. So there's this book, there's this her book, Passing of the Aborigines, and one of her motivations was the idea that Aboriginal people were a dying race, and she wanted to record what she could before they disappeared. And she then also goes into popular culture and popular fiction, and we end up with, this is fiction, this is a history, but then these sort of people riffing on the idea of Daisy Bates, and she strikes a chord musically as well. So somebody has written the opera of Daisy Bates as well in 2012. So she's out there, and you know, this image of her, you can see there, her with her umbrella and a hat, and her Victorian clothes. So the collection in the National Library has 51 boxes of papers. It's 8.16 metres of shelf space, which is the way that archivists and librarians like to refer to the extent of a collection. And these were papers collected, you know, from the early 1900s right through her life. She died in the 50s, early 50s, I think. So she was... okay. So the issue then is I'm looking at just one section of these papers. So the National Library has divided the papers into 13 sections, and Sally White, Isabella White, wrote a book, The Native Tribes of Western Australia, which dealt with all of the sections except the vocabularies, pretty much. And she wrote the book that Daisy Bates always wanted to write and never got around to writing by combining all this information together. So I've taken section 12, which is the other section, which is all the vocabs, and that's the topic of this project. So what happened was in 1904, Malcolm Fraser, who was the government statistician, and I think also the protector of Aborigines at that time, commissioned Bates, and I haven't found exactly how that happened, but nevertheless Bates was asked to write a questionnaire which would be sent out around Western Australia and other places, and would be filled out by various people. It was sent out to squatters, to police, to magistrates, to work with Aboriginal people and write down the items in the list. And we'll look at the list in a moment. But this is from Trove, so you can see the item here, and true to the project, we have the textual version and the manuscript together, so you can see them both. So they printed 500 copies of this questionnaire, and you know, the work will be highly valuable, seeing that at present we possess nothing of such a comprehensive character. And as far as I know, I don't think anybody else has done anything similar in Australia, putting together a questionnaire that was sent out and filled in this way. So linguists have little questionnaires that linguists take out, but it's not done on this sort of scattergun approach that was taken here. The vocabs themselves were printed booklets like this, and you can see at the front you've got some metadata, some information about where it was recorded, who recorded it, and usually the name of the speaker that was recorded as well. And then handwritten responses. And there were in the order of 1,700 word prompts and a bunch, 195 sentence prompts in this questionnaire. In the end, they went out, and of the 500, around 220 were filled out, and then Bates typed the questionnaires as typescripts. So then the collection itself is made up of these different kinds of documents. So you have the questionnaires themselves, and you can see that they've got a structure, they've got a page number, so you can always tell for any word what page it came from. So I thought initially this is going to be great because we can just point to these pages, it's fairly straightforward. Then there's the typed version of it. But of course, people being people, there are also free-form manuscripts that are not related to the questionnaires immediately, and so they have to be treated differently. So the three types of documents basically: typescript, questionnaire, and manuscript. The questionnaires were set out in under these headings. You can see man-is relationships, and so on. And then short sentences have general vocabulary and so on. But these headings are not always completely reliable. So fishes includes crabs and mussels, maybe, okay. Reptiles includes frogs, insects include centipedes, leeches and spiders. Elements, bizarrely, also includes plants, which you'd think should actually have been in the plant section. Yes. And short sentences and questions as well. So she set out instructions for how to do this as well. So very great care should be taken to ascertain exactly how it's pronounced by the native, and then in writing it down it should be spelled phonetically to represent as near as practicable the exact sound made use of, and you know, syllables and so on. So she had a sort of a sense of how people should write it, And what's interesting is that in 1892, the Royal Geographic Society sent out these instructions for writing native languages to colonial authorities all over the empire. So this is actually quite a good sort of summary of, you know, R as in fibre, E as in English, racine, O as in moat, and so on. So using this, potentially, people could write relatively good representations of the languages that they were confronting if they took this into account. But this was there anyway, so people could have had this information available to them. Each of the vocabs, as I said, had the name of speakers typically. So here you can see you've got Mongolia or Mongolia, we don't know, of Mungni. With the cold it's not going to help. Bibilia, Munduru, and so on. So people's names, and then also place names. So Wongalabilla and Nalbinya, which is Bilbilia's mother's country. And then she's got a note, all these are there. So typically this is what we have, is a typescript, which is a version of the questionnaire. But again, there's additional material. So the questionnaires have not only answers to the questions that are put in there, but other things as well. And you can imagine when you're sitting down and asking somebody some questions, they start saying, oh yeah, and they start thinking of other things, and then you want to capture that information as well. So that's also in these manuscript pages, and that information needs to be captured as well. I haven't spent a lot of time figuring out what the languages are. I want to make more than just an educated guess. I want to do a bit more work on it. But so about half of the vocabs at the moment don't have a language assigned to them, identified. But of the rest of them, most of the vocabs that we've identified so far are Noongar. Now, she recorded people, she didn't record languages. So she recorded lots of people in the southwest, and people that happen to be Noongar speakers. So I want to do obviously a lot more on this, because at some point we want to be able to have a way of searching through just one language, for example. The collection has 21,000 page images, so these were microfilmed by the National Library. So the National Library has microfilmed the whole Daisy Bates collection, and the microfilms are pretty good quality. And it would have just been way too expensive to go back and re-film the original documents. So I arranged to have the microfilms digitised. And that's the basis for all of this work. All the images that you see are from TIFF images taken from the microfilm. And yeah, we've talked about what kinds of documents there are. So, as I said, these questionnaires have a predictable content up to a certain point. So we know that the word for scorpion is always going to be on page 25. So that's a way we can link from a TypeScript back to an image of the questionnaire, because we have a master list which says scorpion, go to page 25, and we have named these documents in a way that allows this to happen. So for example, the TypeScript here has the word iguana long-tailed. That can link across to here, because in this document we have something that says this document represents this TypeScript page.
Can I ask a question? So, did the Indigenous people who were filling in the questionnaire or having the questionnaire filled in for them have good enough English to know what a long-tailed iguana was in English? How did they solve that problem?
Well, that's a good question. There are lots of... We'll talk a bit about the weirdness of some of these prompt words that, you know, it's very unclear where she got them from, and I don't think she had very much experience of Australian languages at that point to you know, it's pretty clear that not all these prompts are appropriate.
And also that was something just in relation to that, the project seems to be to seek the native version of the English words. It's very located in an English view of the world, if you like. So how much limitation?
Well, so she has the word for aunt and mother and uncle, which aren't appropriate terms, right? I mean, these are English terms, but they're not represented typically in Aboriginal languages. you have two different kinds of aunties, two different kinds of uncles. You've got mothers, brothers, and mothers, fathers, brothers, and there's all that kind of stuff that she hasn't taken into account here. So we don't, when you get a word like aunt in here, which one of them is it? So yeah, there are a lot of problems with it, absolutely. But it has to be taken as a document of its time, and understood there. And I think you can still get lots out of it. But you can see the linking then. This document's called this document's called that, and that document's called that. And so the naming is actually critical. The naming of files is the way that all this stuff can be linked up together. And the naming is done, I'll talk about that in a minute. So one of the problems is that documents like this don't have any predictable structure. You have to go through, and for each, so we do this by rows and cells. This is the sort of encoding that's used, just like a table. And for each cell, we have to put in a correspondence to the page that it comes from. This is really labour-intensive work, but it's the only way that it can be done. So having embarked on this project that I thought was going to be automated and wonderful, and it's the old 80-20 rule. 80% of it does come for free, and then the 20% is where you have to really put in the work to make it to work better. When the images were microfilmed, they came back with names like this from the National Library. So these are completely meaningless names. They're process names. So they're just this is the one after that. So they had to be renamed, and they're renamed to something like this, which actually might look meaningless too, but it is really meaningful. And it's meaningful because if you look at the top of that document, you have a number, and each of these has a folio and page number from the National Library. So because the document has that within it, this document then is 38-076M, because it's a manuscript. So it's sort of predictable, and the problem with dealing with 21,000 pages is if you lose some pages, you can't find them again. They've disappeared into this mess of stuff. So opening up documents and knowing that that's the identifier is a great clue to how to locate it. So these, as I said, it's folio and page number. If it's a questionnaire, so the questionnaires are also one identifier in the National Library. So this is a document that actually has 100 pages, which is the booklet. So then we add, after the Q, we add the page numbers. So you can resolve to each page number within a booklet in this way, and then these are folio and manuscript numbers. So then these become, so this is the typed version. We're typing it in XML, which is just a tagging system. So you've got the text, and then you put tags around bits of the text. The tags let you retrieve bits of the text later on, or let the computer do it. So it's it's made for computers to do this kind of thing. And for each page break, we have a declaration that this is a new page, and then these are the items within that page, and then you get to the end of the page, you've got a new page break. So that's the way the pages are linked. So this was sent off to be typed by an agency, and they put in, so every time they got to a new page, they put in the page break information. And then with XML you can mark up things like, here's a person's name, so person's name and their role is a speaker. So these tags aren't visible, they're hidden information, but they're used by the computer then to do stuff with. So we can extract all of the people names from this collection now. We have tribe name, Marudunere in this case, place name, and see place name here, but we also have geography. So we'll look at the way this is presented on a map, but geography, it's a point that you can point to. And then there's a language identifier as well, and this is using the international three-letter codes for language, if one exists for the language. And this should also then, as I said, allow us to do things like produce a list of all the words from a particular language or search for words within a particular language. And then that lets you do things like this. So this is the word for I from the questionnaire and its distribution geographically.
and then you can click on that and it takes you to it. We'll have a look at a live version of it in a minute. But what's interesting about it, even when you look at it like this, you can see this sort of clumping of different words. So meal, there's a lot of words like meal, if I here, and up here there's lots of words like guru, and then tula. So it gives you this sort of sense of how the languages also group together. What it also does, which is quite interesting, is you get the word for alligator, and as you'd expect, you have words for, well, alligator, but it's crocodile up in the north. But what's it doing in Perth? Right? And then you look at the word, and it's bangara or bongyar, so it's obviously a goanna.
But, sorry.
Yeah.
So would someone have been drawing the picture of what they were after?
I have no idea how they did it. I think each of them was done by a different person, so
Okay.
they
So it
would
didn't
have
come
had...
out with a set of prompt cards?
No.
So,
No.
okay.
And some people were better at doing it than others, and we'll see some of the questionnaires only had 9 things filled in, some of them had 2,000 things filled in.
That wouldn't have anything to do with Zoom.
It could. Was the zoo here in 19? I don't know, but I suppose the thing is when you display information geographically, then you get these anomalies thrown up, and that's sort of interesting. And then you get also these strange terms like a walking Yuri parrot. Has anybody ever heard of a walking Yuri parrot?
No.
You have? Okay. Because you know Noongar. Because the term that turns up here is wakinjera or wakungwar. So it's possible that that's, her being based in Perth, somebody's identified this parrot as being a wakungwar parrot or something like that. But why does it end up in a questionnaire when nobody else seems to know the term? And you can see there are only, 5 responses. I'll just show you some examples if I can.
Can you see whether or not people were on their own country from the language
No.
responses? So there was no tagging about...
No. Well...
Did they record information about the people that they were interviewing, which might tell you whether they were far from home?
Yeah. In some cases they might, because they do say person of such and such a place. But we don't always know where the questionnaire was filled out. In fact, we usually don't know where the questionnaire was filled out. So, yeah, I mean, that's a whole other research project, really. I think that could be facilitated by having the material available in this form, but it's not something that I've done so far. So what we have then is, this is very skittish. Sorry. This mouse is not very good. So as you scroll through, you'll see that the page has changed. So that the result of having those page break and all that stuff, all the correspondences in the XML, means that for any page you're at, as you move your mouse, it will bring the pages up that correspond to that point that you're in. And you can see that the one on the right moves more than the one on the left, and so on. It's just, we're trying to keep all of that information available together. And then if you click on some of these, it will take you to the map. And it should show you. Is not one of the words. So one of the problems we have is that not all the words here are actually words in the list. So emu is, and then we have the word for emu. You can see again you get this sort of spread of yellowberry here, yellowberry all over the place, and then gallia down here. And any of these, we'll just see what happens if we click on it. It takes you back to the source. So there's the word for emu there. And the source document, and at the top of this, it tells you. This is the sort of the page that tells you, gives you the information, the metadata of that document. We can look more at examples in a minute. I have to go back to my. Oh, good.
So that information, Nick, was the name of the informant and their place where.
Yeah.
where
Yeah, typically. I mean, often it'll have their gender, so we can say M or F. Sometimes it'll tell you if they've since died, because she typed these in the later, sort of as she got funding, she typed them. So it's done incrementally over time after this. So she would have kept in touch and maybe found out that someone had died, and she put that information in as well. And tribe group and language group, or language. So tribe group might not necessarily be the same as language. So she records them.
And that's what's showing on the map, not the location where the interview was done necessarily, but what was identified, how the person identified as their.
Yeah, so say of
their
Northampton,
country.
then that's what we've put in here. But this is really a work in progress, and I'm really keen for any feedback. And I go to Talking Kalgoorlie the other day and got some really interesting feedback on some of these that need to be shifted to different places. So please do get back to me if you see things that need to be changed. Having typed it up, then you can do stuff like count, how many prompt words there are, and so only 19 of the words have more than 120 responses. And they're these terms, so eye, hand, ear, so body parts, mother, tongue, fire, so on. So these are the only ones that have been responded to by over 120 questionnaires. And the most commonly provided term is I, 134.
Is that based on whether the questionnaire was done or whether they're able to get an answer? And I'll go back to that, it's English-centred, it's coming from English language concepts, and maybe if there is no match, you're not going to get an answer. Is it that, or is it just that they couldn't do the questionnaire because they couldn't get responded?
Well, but you can imagine that it's easier to indicate that you want to know what the word right
That's
is
right.
than four-headed.
Yeah. Well, it's usually the way that body parts are the first thing that you ask for, because they're easy. You've got a reference immediately to hand, as you say.
A Marsh Harrier? Is that a tough one?
Well, exactly. So these are the words that have not a single form. Predictably, right? Donkey, volcano. So abstract, time, timed. So she clearly didn't test this vocab out before she got it printed. Because you could have ditched these words straight away.
Well, it reveals something about the asker, doesn't it, really? It doesn't reveal much about the Indigenous languages, but it reveals something about the people who asked the question.
Yeah. So it's not like you have 140, 150 vocabs of 2,000 words. You've got quite a range, and we can look at some more of that information.
It's great seeing it on those maps, like seeing the word classes. I mean, that's a really lovely way of displaying it, isn't it? It's really...
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So we can see there are around 60 language names.
Hey, late as usual.
Well, the artwork that you see here is by Jalalga Murray.
Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, so the artwork, beautiful background. Around 60 language names identified. So when I said we can, when they say speaks X from such and such a place, that's what I'm talking about here. So they're not necessarily language names that we know today. They might be different to what we call languages today. About 220 individuals named, and that's both collectors and speakers, but we can identify the difference between them. And so on, 37 tribal groups and 270 source place names. So these are the places named, lots of places named. Not all of them, I can't find all of them. It needs more work to find some of these places to be able to map them. But, you can see it's quite a spread, and it is mainly Western Australia, but if you remember when you looked at the map, there's a bit of Central Australia and there's some South Australia in the vocabs. Now, the rest of the collection, of course, has lots of other information in it, but that's for another day. These are the names of the languages that have so far surfaced from the collection. So, Kazdaru, I don't know what that is. But, you most likely can figure it out once we do a bit more work on it. Some of them are straightforward, like, they're still language names that we know today.
Where's my Guru? We lifted it early on, but
That's
it
right.
didn't show up there.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be there. And then there are a lot of problems with the list, right? The spelling systems that are used make it very difficult to do any comparisons. The legibility of the handwriting sometimes is very difficult, especially in the manuscripts. And as we've seen, there's different coverage per list, so some lists don't have very much. And even in the list that she sent out, she included duplicates. So the word for husband occurs twice in the list. So when you're doing this automatic linking from words, when you get to husband, it starts getting a bit crazy because it's trying to find both versions, and we're fixing that at the moment. Yeah, these words are duplicated. So porpoise, scorpion, so on occur twice in the list. So again, it needed to be proofread before it got sent out. And then the responses also vary. So, you know, from our point of view, it's not much different to say wife, is that your, and wife, is that yours, but from a computer's point of view, these aren't the same thing. And each of these, you know, are different forms of the same prompt word, which somehow need to be related. So that's another task, is to build what you might call an ontology that links together different forms of the same meaning, so that you will find all wife, is that yours, and wife, is that your, at the same time. But these are all the little gotchas that you don't foresee when you start on the project. And then sometimes she's combined several questionnaires, and what she's done here is she's taken earlier sources, so Simmons, Armstrong, Chauncey, Knight, Stokes, Lyne, so all sort of Noongar vocabs from the late or the 1800s, and she's combined them into one list. And sometimes she's combined them using questionnaires too, so then you've got two questionnaires that relate to one list, and that's a difficult thing to deal with. So the question, I suppose, is why bother? I think it's, you know, as I said at the beginning, there's so little information for most Australian languages. And in this collection, there are words from Amangu. Amangu is a language from the Geraldton sort of way. And there's very little information about that. So the two vocabs in here really represent a lot of what we know about that language. So it is really important to be able to make it accessible and usable. The fact that she didn't record languages is also nice, because it means that you can get a sense of variation within languages. So for the Noongar stuff, you've got, you know, lots of vocabs from the whole of the southwest, and then you might see some of the variation that you get within different Noongar languages. So, I mean, part of the project then is also exposing where information's missing or where we can chase up more detail, and putting it online lets you do that kind of thing. This is a list of the people names that are extracted. So you can see this is a mix of collectors and Aboriginal people. But the Aboriginal people here, you know, you should be able to link them into other sets of material at some point, if privacy allows. Now, a bit of the technicalities. This is built, as I said, we're using XML, and it's a good digital humanities project, as well as just being a nice presentation of a bunch of stuff. I think it's done properly, which means that the transcripts are text. That's the thing with XML, it's just text, which means it can survive into the future. It's not stuck inside a database that nobody's going to be able to get access to if the computer falls over. It's all in GitHub, and there's a programmer who lives in Brisbane and I live in Melbourne, and we use GitHub as the authoritative version of the data. We can each put stuff into it, and every night this pipeline runs. This is a pipeline. The pipeline is a set of, you know, programs that run over the data and create the web pages that we're looking at. So if you see mistakes in there, I can go in, correct it on my computer, push that into GitHub, and then that night it gets put through the pipeline again, and the next day the pages are fixed. So it's a nice way of working. The good thing about the Text Encoding Initiative, TEI, this is a set of rules that have been established by a community of scholars all over the world who typically work with medieval manuscripts and that kind of stuff. Because what they want to do is they have these beautiful illuminated manuscripts, and they want a textual version of it, and they want to be able to, you know, do rich readings of the manuscript with their XML version. So we're using the same technology here. But what's good about it is it has a thing that they call a schema, which is like a grammar which says these are the legal ways you can use this encoding. And that means you can check your coding against the grammar, and that's called validation. You validate your XML against the schema, which means that your documents always conform to this structure, which means that they can be treated the same way by the computer. It doesn't mean the content is all the same, it means that tagging and the structure of the document conforms to the XML schema. So everything's checked. If it's invalid, it gets put aside. Valid transcripts then are converted into HTML for presentation on the web. And we also extract RDF, and I won't explain RDF because I don't really understand it, but it's one of the Web 2 technologies, which is about establishing relationships between objects in the collection, and that's all stored in an RDF database. So this allows other ways then of viewing the material. So it uses JSON, and you can do the sort of statistics that we've done just automatically because the material is all stored in these formats. So I've been working with Clint Bracknell recently, and he was quite keen to get section 11 of the Bates papers because that's the songs collection, and we've just got that digitised and we're renaming the files right now, and we're going to add that into this collection as well. So they're differently structured documents. We'll have to think of how they will work, but that's the sort of the immediate next step with this collection. And then because of doing this work and talking to lots of people about it, it occurs to me and to Clint that it would be great to have some kind of platform for lots of early sources of Australian languages. So people have been doing this kind of work in their little corners, but it isn't done in any way that sort of feeds back, and if you want to go and search for stuff in your language and you're not on country, or how do you find it? So building a platform that allows this stuff to grow, I suppose. So some sort of standard format and a way of ingesting the material so that you can have it available on the web. And that would be early sources like Bates, like Tyndale, Kerr, all the early things that people worked with. And Clint Bracknell has been doing a lot of work with Noongar manuscripts, so he's already got quite a lot of the early Noongar manuscripts ready to be put into this format. So that's a sort of idea for a future project, and we're currently also building a fuzzy search. So this is a way of, well, there are two things. One is allowing people to search for words. So here's an example. Tyndale wrote about a species of moth. He was at Aberdeen, and he called it biarabidi, and I think this went into the Latin name for it. And then a colleague asked me, because we couldn't find a source for this, where was this word coming from? And if you wanted to look for it through Bates, you'd be leafing through 21,000 pages, you wouldn't do it. But, so searching for biarabidi found nothing. And then looking for other sort of logical variant forms, all found nothing. But in the end, biarabidi, so you can see it's slightly different because the retroflex is on the end here, anyway, it doesn't matter. But so when we do our fuzzy search, we want to be able to look for really all these forms with when you enter one word into the search, it should look for all those forms. And you should have the choice of looking for exactly what you're looking for, or a fuzzy search. And that will give you a generous set of hits in the data. And what I'm also going to do is build a linguist's standard term for each. So for each word, I'll render it as just a normalised spelling. So any Ds will become Ts, any Ds will become Ps, and that won't be exposed to the public. I don't want to get into discussions which, many years of experience have told me you don't want to do, but it will allow the data to have a single form underlying, so you won't be seeing it, but it'll allow you to do something like this. So this is a map of relationships between European languages, and it's based on a table, a very simple table, in which you have the word. So you can imagine we'll have our standardised terms in some different languages, but because they're standardised, we can do a distance measure between them. Now this is a really simplistic sort of thing that says how many spelling changes are required to get from this word to this word. So in this case it's a distance of 2. So it's fairly blunt instrument, but it's what people do. It's called a Levenstein distance. technical term. And this is done, for European languages here, but you should be able to do it with Bates vocabs. Once you have a standardised form, then you can look at the distance between vocabs. So then, if you've got some vocabs and you're not sure what language they are, if they clump together, then you've got a good idea. So David Nash did this for the southeast of Western Australia, getting vocabs, and he's written about it in this book, doing this sort of comparison between vocabs and seeing how they clump. And you can see they've clumped into this sort of grouping over here, some over here, some over here. And what you can do then is map that, put that onto a geographic map, and you get to see similarities that have real geography associated with it. Now, of course, this is all smoke and mirrors, but it sort of works, and it's quite interesting. So that's the sort of stuff we'll be able to do with the Bates material eventually if we do all the standardisation. Now, the Bates papers have been available since the 1930s as paper. She deposited the papers in the Parliamentary Library in the 30s. And copies of the papers are available, as you may know, in the Batty Library, the Bath Library in Adelaide, and the National Library in Canberra. The Bath Library's made copies of the documents available online as images. So you can go to the Bath Library and get PDF versions of the images, but it's not text, so you can't search it, you can't do anything like that with it.
Is that open access?
Pardon?
What's the access rights to the...
Completely open.
It's open?
Yeah, it's completely open. So from the perspective of the library, she died in the 50s, so it's out of copyright. Libraries are quite cautious, so they didn't put it up if they didn't think they had the rights. Bath Library claims the rights in the Bates material. It's just the way it is. I think the National Library has the rights in it, but that's just... Now, I don't want to portray this as being all roses. I think it's problematic putting stuff online, making it open access. Even though the papers, as I say, have been openly available for many years, you can go to the Batty Library and look at them. Digitising stuff and putting it online is a different thing. It's not the same. It does make it ubiquitous and accessible. And it may not be what some Aboriginal people want. And so Kim talks about, unsettling to hear Noongar words and phrases spoken without reference to any other authority than the spellings available in the archives. And you know that happens. People get stuff out of the archives, and then that becomes the authority that they use. And without knowing how those spellings were arrived at, it can sound quite different to what it should sound like. And then, Noongar's an endangered language. It's hard to find fluent speakers. So I think it's important if such languages to be shared so that all might more fully understand the extent of the human relationship in this country, then it first must be consolidated and rejuvenated in its home community before it's disseminated further. So I want to put this up there before anybody starts asking me the hard questions and say, I'm thinking about it, but I'm not sure what to do about it. But we can talk about this a bit more. So there's the problem of making language records accessible, that they may not... People may do things with them that the speakers don't want, but I think there are many benefits of making them available. That you can extract the text. So because it's structured text, we'll have a way of exporting it. You can say, I want this as a table, or I want it as a PDF, or whatever. And then, being able to visualise relationships between items in the text, that will be possible because of the way that it's structured. And then methods that are used here are open to other manuscript-based projects, and I think I want to really model that we shouldn't be just taking stuff out of historical sources and putting it into a database. That's not a good way of working with historical sources from a scientific point of view. And having done this with the structured vocabs, extending this into the unstructured part. So the song collection will be a good example of that, which isn't going to be a tabular format, it's going to be pretty much just text with songs. And also showing this connection between text and manuscript images. So I'm hoping that we'll have a launch of this in June, and I'm really happy for any feedback. And yeah, the references. Thank you very much.